This is Fit to Succeed in partnership with NordicFitnessEducation.com with host Ben Pratt.
I say I ate the exact same way when I was lean and fit. I ate the exact same way when I gained 50 pounds. And I ate the exact same way when I lost 50 pounds. What was the difference? Menopause and intermittent fasting, learning to pause from eating.
In this episode of the Fit to Succeed show, we welcome intermittent fasting coach Laurie Lewis. When her body entered menopause, many of the symptoms of hormonal change and switching physiology affected her significantly. This led ultimately to an over 50-pound weight gain, which was very distressing. After some years of struggle, Laurie read about intermittent fasting in an article. This really inspired her, and she began her own intermittent fasting journey, which ultimately led to the loss of all of those 50 pounds that she had gained. Laurie then turned her personal successes into a thriving intermittent fasting coaching business. As a certified health coach already through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, Laurie combines her knowledge of nutrition with deep research and practice of time-restricted eating. So let's get to this episode with Laurie Lewis. It's great to have our audience and listeners with us today. We are speaking with a coach on the subject of intermittent fasting. Her name is Laurie Lewis. Hi, Laurie. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Ben. Nice to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And we're worlds apart. The Atlantic Ocean separates us today. But despite that, you have been so brave and got up early in the morning, and we are going to have a great discussion, I hope.
I am ready to go here in Portland, Oregon, on a nice cloudy day, as we are known for.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, here in Ireland, it's a little bit between cloud and sun, but hey, all the same. Now, as I mentioned just there, we're going to discuss intermittent fasting today. Now, this is a subject we have spoken about on the Fit to Succeed show previously. We've had various guests who've kind of touched on this subject, not the least our episode number 43 with Danny Lennon. We talked more specifically around the science of time-restricted feeding. Now, the science is all very interesting, but I really want to get into maybe a coach's perspective as how do you help somebody, get convinced, I suppose, of the idea of going without food for longer. So we're going to delve into those subjects. So perhaps just as an intro for the listeners, I wonder, why do you think our listeners should take a little bit of time to listen to this episode of the show as we discuss intermittent fasting?
Well, I know it sounds hard and scary and impossible and ridiculous, all those things. Like, why on earth would a person do that? And the answer to that question is that pausing from eating matches the design of our physiology. Our bodies, much like sleep, need this rest, this repair. It's a digestive, hormonal, metabolic rest, healing time. And a lot of us are sleep deprived, so we don't honor our sleep as much as our bodies need. And we certainly have lost sight of the fact that our bodies shouldn't be taking in nutrients or flavors or sweetness or calories or anything that makes digestion rev up. We want to be in that place of stillness so that we can heal each day and feel better.
I like that comparison to sleep. You probably know that we have a course that we deliver on sleep. And so I completely relate to that idea of resting and then active. The human body goes through these phases. And so that makes a lot of sense with regards to nutrition as well, this concept of physiological cycles. And we'll certainly get into that maybe a little bit as we go through the show. Now, first of all, maybe let's backtrack just a touch, because you were introduced yourself to intermittent fasting some time ago. And I wonder, why did you begin personally to use this as a method of eating?
I began personally because, well, in my 40s, I felt like I was at the top of my game. I was lean, my clothes fit well. I lived in New York City for about 25 years, and I walked everywhere, and I was running marathons, and I'd been studying nutrition as a personal interest for well over 20 years. And all of a sudden, perimenopause hit. Now, I think most human beings have heard of this phase in a woman's life where her hormones completely flip upside down and we experience some challenges. But that's basically all people know. And they don't send us to biology class for older ladies. And then people apologize to men like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking about my hormones. It's like, okay, people, we don't need to apologize for talking and studying and learning and sharing what's happening. So I got hit hard. And at the same time, as happens with many women in their late 40s, we get hit with autoimmune diseases or adrenal exhaustion. Our body is basically saying, time out, you've been undergoing way too much stress for way too long, and it's game over.
Mhm.
And so that happened to me. I got extreme adrenal fatigue. I had all the symptoms of a terrible perimenopause, which were night sweats and hot flashes and brain fog and memory loss and equilibrium off. And then when menopause hit, it hit me a little early, 49. The average is 52. I suddenly gained 50 pounds. And everyone around me said, whoa, wait a minute. You're the healthiest person we know. You're the healthiest eater we know. How could you gain 50 pounds? I'm like, I know. It was all hormonal.
What sort of time
And
period are we talking about there, Laurie? How long did it take you to gain that weight?
so perimenopause symptoms now, in hindsight, I can see it. At the time, I couldn't. I remember my sweet brother saying something like, isn't depression part of menopause? I'm like, I don't know, So 44 is when it really kicked in. And then 49 is when I hit actual menopause.
Mhm.
And the weight gain came on really quickly in just a matter of years. And so I did everything I knew to do. I was knowledgeable. I was fit. I had lost 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds in the past, and nothing worked. So I
So just to be
struggled.
clear there, you didn't change your eating habits during those years of gain. You didn't change your exercise habits, but your body weight put some body fat on regardless.
That's right. I say I ate the exact same way when I was lean and fit. I ate the exact same way when I gained 50 pounds. And I ate the exact same way when I lost 50 pounds. What was the difference? Menopause
Right.
and intermittent fasting, learning to pause from eating. So I really suffered from 49 to 54, doing everything I could to turn it around. And then one amazing night, I hadn't lost glimmer of hope. There was just a little crack of light remaining. I started to subscribe perhaps to the idea that, does it really, or is it really all downhill from here? I'm an eternal optimist. I couldn't believe that I would have to join the camp or join the belief that life just gets worse and harder and heavier and foggier. But I was almost there. And one night, I read about intermittent fasting online as I was supposed to be, tucking in bed and putting my screens away, as we know with good sleep hygiene, but we are not immune to the temptation. And I just was so distraught. And up popped the words for the first time that I'd never heard together. I was familiar with long therapeutic fasting, where you go under medical care, like to Hippocrates or True North here in the US. But I didn't know you could live as a lifestyle consciously, healing and resting and fasting clean, and then eating in an eating window. And you asked the question at the top about what could entice people to stay and listen to this. I love to entice people with the idea that eating makes you hungrier,
Mhm.
and fasting actually makes you brighter and clearer and stronger, and you lose the hungry, gnawing feelings when you're fasting. So that's worth sticking around for, I think.
I think that's a really fascinating way that you've described that the sense, and I'm sure many people can probably relate to this, where you have these days where your hunger is gnawing away at your willpower, where you may be trying to resist the tempting foods and you just can't, because this feeling just won't go away, this biological drive to seek out pleasurable food. So why then did this idea of going without food for longer periods of time, why did that appeal to you in that moment when you were reading the article?
Well, it seemed to make perfect sense to me. There was nothing about it that I thought, that sounds like a bad idea. It sounded like a challenge, but it seemed logical, especially based on our physiology throughout all human history. Food was available, and then there was no food, and then there was food, and then there was no food. And the idea that when we don't have food, our brain gets sharper and brighter, and we have more strength and stamina, it makes sense. We had to go out and find food. We didn't wake up in the morning and have a refrigerator inches away. We, meaning our ancestors, we people had to go out and find it. And that could be running around for 6 hours. So it just makes sense to me that even up to the 1970s, I grew up, so I'm on this cusp, right? I grew up right before the snack generation. And our mom would say, you can't have a snack, it'll spoil your dinner. And so not spoiling dinner, like, what does that mean? Waiting for hunger to build so that we can have a nutritious full meal. And we don't do that now. We barely sit down to eat. We're grazing all the time. We can't even get in the car without a car full of snacks. So we're in the snack generation, and it's not serving us well. And we can point to obesity and metabolic syndrome and some really dire epidemic of
Yeah,
ailment.
I would definitely agree. I mean, even government guidelines or national guidelines start to indicate that we should be eating on regular occasions, maybe 4, 5, 6 times a day to actually cover those snacks that you're referring to.
Yeah.
Indeed. Now, fasting as a concept is not new. You kind of alluded to that already. You were well aware of the concept of fasting for other purposes. And certainly anyone who's familiar with the Bible will be aware that fasting as a concept, existed in Old Testament times. So it's been around for thousands of years. However, then it was typically more of a spiritual connection with God by, giving up the food that connects us here to mortality, I suppose. From your understanding, how do you help people that you work with understand the potential health benefits that can come from fasting as shown in the science?
I'll touch really quickly on the spiritual aspect. So it's all religions and meditation practices actually that, Ramadan and Yom Kippur and people in most major religions have a facet of fasting as part of the spiritual practice. Not only the idea that you posed, which was to go without as a example of sacrifice perhaps, but the mental awakeness, the discernment that occurs in a fasted state, a brightness, an openness, really could be considered a spiritual practice because it does provide an awakening. And when people are consistently fasting clean every day and get into that ketosis or being fat adapted and our body burning fat for energy, that we do experience what could be considered a spiritual awakening. You can put it in any category you please, whatever your position or opinions are, but it is physical, it's emotional, it's cognitive, it could be spiritual. And so what's happening in the body is it's countless mechanisms, but I like to start with insulin. And insulin is a hormone. And when we don't intake flavors, sweetness, nutrients, the body then keeps insulin low. Insulin, as you know, is a blood sugar regulator, has lots of other jobs, but one of its other jobs is to store fat. And in the presence of high circulating insulin, the body cannot burn fat. It cannot tap into the fat stores that we're carrying around. And so what we're attempting, just first and foremost, is to keep insulin low for an extended period of time so that we can burn through that glucose, burn through the glycogen in our liver and tucked other places, and then shift into utilizing our body fat for fuel, which is, the term is becoming fat adapted. And that feels great.
Why does that feel so great? Just out of interest.
There's an alertness, there's a strength, there's a focus, there is physiologically, Alzheimer's is now being called type 3 diabetes because it's partially an issue of our brain fueling on too much glucose and insulinemia. And There's a physician here in the US named Dr. Mark Mattson from Johns Hopkins University, and he was asked by the New England Journal of Medicine to put together a review showing all the cognitive and physiological benefits of eating in a pattern of time. So either time restricted eating or intermittent fasting. They actually aren't the same thing, but we talk about this umbrella term of intermittent fasting. And that was in December of 2019. And the intention was to show physicians in the US and around the world that they could prescribe and guide their patients to eat in a pattern of time. And that could start with 12 hours. It can be as easy as 12 hours. And Dr. Satchin Panda from the Salk Institute in California is an expert in the circadian clock and our circadian rhythms, and has proven that even if you fast in a pattern of 12-12, we take the 24-hour of the day and divide it in two, the fasting hours and the eating window, and even fasting for 12 hours and eating in a 12-hour eating window, repeat, will extend your life, which is really exciting and appealing.
Yeah, that is exciting and appealing. Now, you kind of, it's interesting that you just talked about Satchin Panda and the circadian clock, because, that would suggest to me that individuals who by default sleep on a regular basis, 7-8 hours a night, they're going through a spell of fasting just by the fact that they're sleeping. And, that's where the term breakfast came from, because we're breaking our nightly fast with our meal in the morning. Now, I guess the question that I'd like to ask, that I think is quite important on this subject, and maybe listeners are thinking this, is if we're fasting anyway for 7 or 8 hours a night as a minimum, why would there be a difference in extending that, period for just another 3 or 4 hours, maybe to the 12-hour mark? What biological changes occur because we've chosen to fast just a little bit longer than what would be a normal sleeping period?
Great question. And, some people don't even go through the whole night without intaking something sweet by their bed or getting up. So people are like, oh, well, we're always fasting, for at least 7 or 8 hours. No, not everybody. So the body, like I alluded to earlier, and we can go a little more in depth, and this is very simplistic, but I like to take the science that I've learned and immerse myself in and say it in a way that either is memorable or that sticks with people and they can get it. And some people love the full immersion of the science, and other people are like, you talk way too much about insulin, just tell me what to do. So when that initial period of sleeping and fasting is not enough to burn through all the glucose and then the glycogen in the liver, we shift fuel sources generally one at a time. We're not like a hybrid car where we can skate between them. The body generally utilizes the glucose, then shifts to the stored glucose, which is called glycogen, and then shifts to fat. And that takes time. And so this is generally get into that first shift around 12 or 13 hours. So I really love for people to fast at least 12 or 13 hours. And what that looks like is just look at the clock and decide today, what time are you going to stop eating? And drink only plain water after that, right? So set the time, drink plain water, sleep, wake up, drink plain water, drink a black coffee, and eat 12 hours later. And then maybe the next day, go a little longer. Maybe the next day, go a little longer, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. It doesn't need to be a hard push. Some people like to shoot right out of the gates and go straight till noon. Okay. I actually did that when I started because breakfast has never made me feel well. I've never enjoyed eating in the morning. Other people are like, I have to wake up and eat immediately. So we are all different, and we begin in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think many people, certainly over the years that I've worked with clients, have found that some people have a great appetite in the morning. Some people just, like you said, they cannot face it for at least a couple more hours. And trying to, in my naivety as a young trainer, I remember trying to get people to have breakfast earlier, and it was just always a battle because there was no drive, there was no physiological drive for that person to eat early. And now that I've learned more and coached with more people, perhaps as you're sort of alluding to there, sometimes there isn't the need to do that because the body kind of knows what it's doing. So I certainly appreciate that perspective. Any thoughts on that?
Well, there are people training, professional athletes, competitive athletes, training and even competing in a fasted state. So I know that people love waking up and they feel like they need to get some external fuel in them before they exercise or immediately after. And that may serve an intense, bodybuilding type athlete. But for those of us who are normal people who have some fat to lose or want to live vibrantly and healthfully and live longer and feel well and maybe reduce some aches and pains and some medications, the idea of fasting clean and exercising and moving in a fasted state, I get into fat burning a lot easier. I get more quickly. And I wake up in the morning. I'm probably about, I don't know, 10 hours fasted. I go to the gym early and work out hard in a fasted state. I alternate that with some more gentle yoga mornings. And then I don't eat for another 8 hours. And HGH hormone increases, fat burning increases, and I'm bright and alert all day. And I'm 58 years old and I'm on no medications. All the pain that I was in, extreme pain, head to toe, is all gone. Plantar fasciitis gone. All inflammatory markers normalized. My menopausal hormones are in equilibrium. And so waking up in the morning and moving and getting the body into more quickly into a fat burning state and staying there is really appealing, being stronger and with more
So,
stamina.
and so the question I just thought of there as you were explaining that, which was fascinating to hear, is how many years now have you been following a typical intermittent fasting approach?
Just about 4 years. In a month from now, 4 years, which is, I don't know, 1,400 days without missing a day. And, people are like, gosh, that sounds so constraining. It's actually liberating. You can move your eating window around. Some days it's longer, some days it's shorter. You just look at your schedule, your body, your constitution. Some people have a morning eating window because they feel much better that way. Other people will close it at 4 because they don't like eating right up until bed. Other people are later night eaters. And it's totally flexible. And once you experience that taste of feeling so well and having the mind cleared and not be thinking about and fixating on food all the time, it's an amazing way a freeing way to live. So,
I like that you've already indicated that it's quite a flexible approach rather than it being something that's
yes.
very fixed and firm. And, when you read sort of around on the internet, I've certainly come across a few more commonly adapted or pushed methods of intermittent fasting. Could you perhaps explain what some of the common approaches are, and then maybe identify which one's your preference and why?
Okay, great. Well, my preference is to work with each individual and customize it.
Okay.
So as I said earlier in the hour, I was a student of nutrition for my own passion. I even went to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in New York for a year and became a certified health coach for no other reason than I love it. And I had no intention of being a health coach because I never wanted to be the food police, but now I'm the fasting police. And so the rigidity, if you will, is around the clean fast, which there's plenty of research to show that, everyone who says, oh, you can have this and you can have that, and you can, have this many calories or that much fat or this much bone broth. It's like, no. We're going for keeping insulin low and the total digestive, hormonal, and metabolic arrest. So plain water, plain black coffee, plain green or black tea, very bitter, and plain unflavored electrolytes. And so once you've established for yourself this clean fast, the protocols that you say, which are the best ones? Which should people try? Or which do I prefer? I prefer that people fast clean and realize the nearly immediate benefits of having your body be in that rest state and go gradually. Now, again, if you're someone who's like, I like doing things quickly, okay, go for it. But you may peter out, you may lose some steam. And I think settling in, easing up to and settling into a 16-8, so a clean fast for 16 hours and an 8-hour eating window, settling in there for a while. And then you look at your work schedule, your family schedule, your fitness, your social life, your goals. And longer fasting isn't always better. We want to have the eating window be long enough that you can inform your body that food is plentiful. There's no famine. You can enjoy the nutritious foods, the delicious foods that you love. And the big practice really is utilizing the eating window smartly, right? People say almost immediately that they feel better in the first few days. The first week, they're like, wow, that was way easier than I thought it was going to be. Then there can be some challenges in the second and third week as the body really becomes fat adapted. And then after that, people are like, okay, the fasting is really easy. It's the eating window that I'm having trouble with. And then we dig into what are the foods that serve your individual body. People need to slow down. People need to put food on a plate and sit and enjoy it and appreciate it and savor it and start to notice our satiety signals, which surprisingly, once you're fasting every day, the body begins to tell you how much food it needs each day. You don't need to eat up until you're stuffed, like stuffed enough to unbutton your button. Your body will say, okay, Laurie, you've had enough today. Okay, Ben, time out, stop eating. And some days it wants more food, other days it wants less food. But because of the quiet that intermittent fasting provides, or eating in a pattern of time, or time restricted eating, whatever you call it, eating in an eating window provides, is we can hear those messages that the body is giving. So to answer your question about the best timing, each person divides the day into, whether it's 17/7 or 21/3, each person will discover for themselves how long they feel amazing fasting and what is the right amount of timing in the eating window to communicate to the body that delicious, nutritious fuel is plentiful and available, and we're loving what we're eating.
Yeah, I found that fascinating, and I really like this idea that it can be so adaptable to someone's personal circumstances. That made me think of, a client who has a strong early morning appetite probably should fit their feeding window, that covers that early morning period. Whereas if they have if they may find later in the day their appetite's not so high, well, that'd be a much easier time to be beginning their fast. Whereas someone who's the
That's
other way
right.
around, no appetite in the morning, but really hungry in the evening, it'd be a lot easier for them to have their feeding window later in the day. Is that the sort of thing that you're getting at?
Yes. And it changes over time. So I think of a lot of clients who I began to coach, and in the beginning they were like, I am a breakfast eater. You are not taking that away from me. I'm like, I wouldn't dream of it. And so we start with 12/12 and 14/10, and then they're like, okay, I can close my eating window earlier and earlier, like 4 and then 2 and and then 1, or what have they may have their eating window from 8 a.m. to 1. And then over time, it can change. And it's all a discovery. I approach this, I invite and encourage everyone to lean in with curiosity. And this is a science project with one subject: your body, your goals, your timing, where you are in age and medication and aches and pains and work and fitness, and all of it weighs in to you selecting the eating window that works well for you right now. And it's just movable. And people find too that it can be a slippery slope. They're like, oh, it's so flexible. It's like, okay, let's tighten it up sometimes, right? Like, as Jen Stevens, my mentor, who wrote Delay, Don't Deny, and another book called Fast, Feast, Repeat, she always says, Saturday is not a special occasion. It happens every week. So we get to decide when we're going to loosen up the eating window for special occasions. And I wanted to say too, regarding your question about the best timing or what I recommend, there in the beginning, two types of people really. People who prefer a set eating window because they don't need any more complexity in their lives. So they could say, I don't eat before noon and I don't eat past 8. And those are their guardrails. And that's constant. And they do that consistently. That works for some people. Other people are like, that sounds like a prison. I need to slide it around. Some days longer, some days shorter. that method actually works very well for the body because it keeps the body guessing, but you need to pick the mode that's best, again, customized, personalized for you and your body and your style of living. But I really recommend the consistent guardrails in the beginning for at least 2, 3, 4 weeks so you can get into this practice, because people are watching the clock in the beginning, like really watching the clock, like, come on, 12, right? And that subsides, and then it becomes much more intuitive and peaceful and easy, and you just wouldn't even dream of eating all the time anymore. There's nothing to go back to. This is so such a joyful way to live because it matches our physiology. You're not working against your body, you're working with it, which is enlivening.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. Particularly like that idea of guardrails. For me, it tends to be 11 till 9 are my guardrails. But actually, sometimes it'll be quite a bit after 11 because I don't actually feel that hungry, but I wouldn't eat before generally. And then the same as I generally don't eat after 9, but sometimes it'll be straight after dinner, 6:30. I'm not hungry anymore, and so it goes from there. But I've got, like you said, guardrails, and I really like that idea of, I definitely don't eat outside that window. But sometimes on some days, particularly days where I'm less active, maybe I'm not doing a workout that day, those guardrails tend to come inwards because I don't need as much energy. Whereas on days where I have been active and done a workout, I tend to find the energy needs are a bit higher. And so perhaps I get a bit closer to the guardrails to manage my body's needs.
That's right. Yes. And in the beginning, people, let's say it's 16-8, 12 to 8, because that's just easy to remember. In the beginning, people are really having to practice waiting until noon. And then, it's 8. I've got to shut my eating window. And that's very deliberate. And we get into that rhythm. But as you say, once you're in that rhythm, you've got this 8 or 9 hour eating window or 6 hour guardrails, but within it, it could be less, or you could slide it earlier or slide it later if you have a special event, or make it longer. People get on their calls with me and they're like, oh, I was so bad this week. I'm like, okay, tell me more. I'm like, you didn't eat outside your eating window. You chose a new eating window for today. Good job. We can choose. There's a lot of freedom here. It's conscious choosing. And in a world, there's a sense that we need to control everything, and life is completely out of our control. Life just happens. And one thing that we actually have a say over is when we eat. So we get to say that we get to feel better.
The more and more we talk, I really get this sense from you, Laurie, that there's this need to adapt the ideas and the principles to be sure it matches the person. I think that's so key. And so often people want to buy an off-the-shelf system and just force it into their lives. And so often that's something that requires too much willpower, might lead to success for a short time, but then the behavior just can't stick with the forced system and people fall off the bandwagon.
That's right. Well, the thing I will strongly again encourage is this idea of the clean fast, because it does make fasting easier. I know that sounds counterintuitive. People are like, what's a little lemon in my water? I need the entertainment. Save the flavor party for your eating window and keep it plain, austere. Like, I don't even know. It's like plain, unflavored, boring. Keep your fasting hours boring, boring, boring. Your body, your mind will greatly appreciate that in the long run. And people who say to me they've been fasting for 3 to 4 weeks or longer and they're struggling to get to 16 hours, I know they're not fasting clean. Right. It makes it harder to take in those nutrients and flavors. And so let's make it really supremely easy for yourself. And then the anticipation of eating later in your eating window, you get all those fun flavors and delicious nutrients later. So I am the clean fasting police.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, now
we
haven't got too much time left. There's a couple of subjects I'd like to quickly address if we can. Now, you have written a book particularly aimed at women in regards to intermittent fasting and helping with menopause and other subjects. Now, in your opinion, do you think the intermittent fasting approach is especially beneficial for women? And are there some female-specific problems perhaps that it may help address?
Well, my book is a workbook. It's called Celebrating Your Vibrant Future, Intermittent Fasting for Women 44 to Forever. It's a long, but it's Celebrating Your Vibrant Future. And it's a workbook of solidarity. Like, you are not alone. The first sentence in the book is, this book is a hug. And it goes into some aspects of perimenopause and menopause so we can start to recognize what those things are, because mostly we don't. I mean, I have women in this giant Facebook group that I help to manage who will say, I missed a period. Oh no. And I'm like, well, how old are you? Like, if you're 48, that's normal. And so I love having written this 90-day workbook, 90-day solidarity program to get women started into this pattern. Now, there's a lot out there on the internet and about how women are delicate flowers and we need to be careful of our hormones. Well, I don't subscribe to a hard push fasting, like harder is better and longer is better, like push hard, set yourself some hard challenges. No, 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 no. I believe in easing in and discovering what is the cadence and the pattern that has you feeling amazing. And I'm steering people towards feeling better. And so that discovery of that personalized time frame is really, really important. So for women of all ages, but especially as we're embarking upon in the middle or past this massive hormonal shift, we aren't getting any younger. And I want to prepare women and all people that the next 50 years of our lives, we can actually feel amazing. And our bodies are designed to pause from eating and eat less and less food in an eating window of your choice. Some people love keeping like a 14-10 or a 15-9, and they'll eat one big meal to open their eating window and then pause, no snacking in between. What a great way to live. And then eat another big meal. It's different for everyone. I eat one meal a day because that's what makes me feel amazing, but I spread the parts of the meal out over 4 hours. People are like, you fast for 20 hours every day? Yeah, because that's what feels amazing to me. And I work out and I, and move a lot. So, and I sleep well. And again, I'm 58 years old and have no more aches and pains and no medication. So the 4-hour eating window works beautifully for me. And I'll use myself and the thousands of women I've coached, and that regarding our hormones, it's an important consideration. And it can be a peaceful, gentle, we don't want to have it be a hard push and raise cortisol, which interacts with insulin and stores fat. Like, we got to do everything we can to mitigate, to keep our stress down. So that does include sleep and meditation and prayer and movement. And I say that having a fasting practice lifts, elevates, makes everything that you care in life better. Your fitness, your meditation, your work performance, your focus, your sleep, your food choices, everything gets better when you have a fasting practice as a foundation.
Nice, nice. And I really like that you mentioned there the need that introducing or engaging in a fasting practice should not become a stressor. It's important. If it does become a stressor, well, that's just going to increase your needs for glucose, which is kind of counterintuitive to fasting in the first place. So
that's right.
So I think that's a great clarification for people to move with what you said as easing into the process rather than enforcing something that is very difficult. Now, I can kind of relate to that because as I already kind of mentioned, my normal eating habits now are pretty much a 14-10 style practice. But about once a month, I will also completely fast. So I'll do a 24-hour fast once a month. And I always find the last sort of 2 to 3 hours particularly difficult, because it's stretching what my body is used to doing in terms of a fast. I sometimes wonder, maybe that's just too much. Maybe for me, about 20 or 21 hours would probably be a more appropriate end to the fast, because it doesn't introduce this kind of flagging 3-hour window where I struggle.
Well, one thing you could look to is increasing your minerals, your electrolytes, and having enough magnesium. maybe even a few grains of high quality salt under your tongue to get that hit of sodium, you may be low in magnesium at that time. So that's something to take a look at. And, you're not doing that every day. And sometimes that stressor, like a really hard workout, raises cortisol, right? But that's not chronic stress, right? It comes up and it serves you. And so I don't know, I like that you do that. And I like that it's a challenge, and stay busy and put that in your calendar. And you said also that you tend to eat less or have your eating window shorter on Sundays. A lot of people do that. Open your eating window at 11, have a big brunch, have a small dinner at 3 or 4, close it early and fast long on Monday. What a way to live. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would up your electrolytes and let me know what happens.
I've got one last question to ask you, and I think we'll kind of bring the conversation to an end. But that is, in terms of weight loss, clearly restricting that feeding window is going to mean that there's longer periods of time where you're having to rely, as you said already, on your body fat stores. Now, some people who debate whether intermittent fasting is truly the difference have identified that the issue for weight loss with intermittent fasting is really because you're eating fewer calories because you've shut down how often you eat during the day. What are your thoughts on that one? Is there some additional benefits with intermittent fasting that are not just because calories have been reduced, or is there something else going on there?
Well, there are plenty of studies that show with two groups of people given the same amount of calories each day, the same food, the same amount of movement, that one group would eat those 1,200 calories, little tiny unsatisfying meals that keep insulin up and you are never satisfied. You're still hungry for more throughout the day. And the second group constraining that same amount of calories to an eating window. The people who eat in the eating window, who fast and eat in the eating window, are much more satisfied, much less fixated on food, and burn more fat. So you could eat the exact same amount, and the people who are time restricted eating or intermittent fasting, eating in an eating more fat and be stronger because the HGH hormone revs up when we're in a fasted state. So
sorry, Laurie, we just lost connection momentarily there. Could you just repeat that last sentence? It was.
So let's see. So the people who eat in the eating window are more satisfied all day, have more energy, less fixation on food. They enjoy their food more and are full in the eating window, and they're stronger, brighter, clearer, burning more fat and raising the human growth hormone.
Fantastic.
So I have never been a calorie counter, but I've done an experiment on myself. I got one of those apps, and for about 3 weeks, every day, I just listened to my body intuitively in my eating window, what my body wanted and needed today. And that discernment is clearer when you're an intermittent faster and the appetite center in our brain is working and our hunger hormones are working. And so I just ate what my body needed each day, and then I entered it into the app for weeks. Some days I ate 800 calories. Some days I ate 2,500 calories, right?
Wow,
so
really that different?
when you're tuning in, right? When you're tuning in to what the body needs today, the big calorie days were really the high fat nutrient days, right? So we don't even talk about calories. We don't count macros. We don't count calories. The fasting is the foundation, and then tune into what your body needs. And I know there's a very strong camp that all this is calorie restriction, or I prefer to say food nutrient restriction, because the body has no calorie receptors. It only receives nutrients and receives food and sorts out what to do with it and what parts to utilize and what parts to store. And that doesn't actually have anything to do with calories. It has to do with the quantity of food and the type of nutrients. And so I have proven for myself and many, many, many clients that when we tune in to the amount of food our body needs today, and we stop eating when we're satisfied, that we're balancing all those hormones. We have over 80 of them, including our hunger hormones, and leptin will inform us when it's had enough. It literally will say, you can stop eating now. We're done.
I think that's a wonderful place to say, and we're done. That was a nice conclusion to this discussion. Now, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show and to talk through your sort of coaching methodology, your style, and how you work with clients to improve their eating habits through the use of an intermittent fasting protocol. So thank you so much, Laurie. Is there anything else you would like to add before we end up?
I'm just so committed to people feeling better and better and enlivened and flourishing. And so it's a pleasure to be with you, especially speaking to people who are committed to fitness and supporting other people with their fitness. I hope that we have together inspired them to share the ideas of eating in an eating window with the people around them and themselves.
Absolutely. And of course, listeners, we will connect you up in the show notes to Laurie's website and to her book. And so we would encourage you to take a look at what she is doing in impacting the world in a positive way. Thanks so much, Laurie.
Thank you, Ben.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share via social media. You can also rate the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. If you'd like to know more about us, then check out our range of online courses at www.nordicfitnesseducation.com.